When William Shakespeare died in 1616, the most famous writer in English left behind no diary, no confirmed personal letters, and no tidy stack of handwritten masterpieces. We have only 6 surviving signatures. Even those look as though the pen was being operated during mild turbulence. So how did one man become so mysterious? The short answer is that Shakespeare did not disappear from history. We know quite a lot about his property, taxes, lawsuits, investments, family, and theatrical career. What we do not have is the private material modern readers expect from a genius. His fame kept growing, while the personal record stayed stubbornly ordinary. That gap became a vacuum, and people have been enthusiastically pouring theories into it ever since. William Shakespeare was baptized in Stratford-upon-Avon on April 26, 1564. His exact birthday is unknown, though April 23rd became the traditional date. His father, John, made gloves, traded in various goods, and rose to become the town's bailiff, roughly its mayor. Then his fortunes declined for reasons that remain uncertain. William probably attended Stratford's grammar school. As the son of an important local official, he would have received an intense education in Latin grammar, classical stories, rhetoric, and the ancient educational technique of making children memorize alarming quantities of text. There is no record of him attending university. This later bothered people who felt that great literature should require a certificate. At 18, Shakespeare married Anne Hathaway, who was about 26 and already pregnant. Their daughter Susanna was born in 1583. Twins, Hamlet and Judith, followed in 1585. Then William becomes difficult to see. Between the twins' baptism and 1592, there is no clear documentary trail showing where he was or how he entered the theater. These are called the lost years. Later stories claimed he poached deer, worked as a schoolmaster, served as a legal clerk, joined traveling actors, or held horses outside a London playhouse. Any of those things might produce a decent opening chapter. None is supported by firm evidence. The important fact is what happened at the other end of the gap. By 1592, Shakespeare was already known in London as an actor and playwright. Another writer, Robert Greene, attacked him as an upstart crow. It was an insult, but also free confirmation that Shakespeare had arrived. Established writers do not complain about completely irrelevant newcomers. London's theater business was noisy, competitive, and physically inconvenient. Playhouses needed a constant supply of new material. Companies performed in daylight before crowds that might include nobles, apprentices, merchants, thieves, and people mainly interested in beer. A playwright was not usually treated as a sacred individual, lowering a finished masterpiece from the clouds. Scripts were revised, borrowed, shared, cut, expanded, and adapted for particular actors. The company needed something performable by the afternoon, preferably with a sword fight. Plague outbreaks closed the theaters during parts of the early 1590s. Shakespeare turned to poetry and published Venus and Adonis in 1593, followed by The Rape of Lucrece. Venus and Adonis became a major success. Before Shakespeare was a marble national treasure, he was the author of a fashionable and rather steamy poem. If you enjoy bad drawings and remarkable lives, subscribe before the paperwork becomes emotionally available. In 1594, Shakespeare became a founding shareholder in the Lord Chamberlain's Men. This decision explains much of his success. He was not simply selling plays for a one-time fee. He acted with the company, wrote for it, and received a share of its income. The arrangement gave him talented performers, especially the leading actor Richard Burbage, and a stable commercial home. Shakespeare could write with actual voices and bodies in mind. As Burbage aged, the great roles changed too. Young romantic heroes gave way to Hamlet, Othello, Macbeth, and King Lear, men carrying considerably more weather indoors. The company built the Globe in 1599, using timber from an earlier playhouse that had been dismantled after a dispute with its landlord. It was an ambitious act of theatrical recycling. Shakespeare became a part owner of the new building, and later held an interest in the indoor Blackfriars Theatre. When James I became king in 1603, the company received royal patronage and became the King's Men. Shakespeare was now connected to the most successful acting company in England. His plays ranged across English history, ancient Rome, imaginary kingdoms, Italian cities, shipwrecked islands, forests full of confused lovers, and several families that would have benefited from sitting down quietly for 10 minutes. But they were built from available materials. Shakespeare used chronicles, translations, older plays, poems, classical authors, and stories circulating around Europe. His originality was not that he invented every plot, it was what he did with them. He gave minor figures inner lives. He placed jokes beside grief, and ordinary hunger beside royal ambition. A king could speak magnificently and still be frightened. A fool could understand the room better than everyone with a crown. That flexibility helped the plays survive, but it also fed the mystery. Readers began searching them for proof of Shakespeare's private experiences. If he described law, he must have been a lawyer. If he wrote about Italy, he must have traveled there. If he understood kings, perhaps he was secretly an aristocrat. This confuses imaginative knowledge with autobiography. A playwright can learn through books, actors, travelers, observation, collaboration, and listening carefully when other people believe he is not listening. Meanwhile, the documents show Shakespeare behaving less like a dreamy poet and more like a determined businessman. In 1597, he bought New Place, one of the largest houses in Stratford. He invested in land and local tithes. He appears in tax records and property disputes. He spent much of his working life between London and Stratford, though we cannot reconstruct the pattern exactly. This creates another uncomfortable contrast. The plays are emotionally enormous. The surviving records are full of money, acreage, and legal phrasing. Humanity received King Lear. The archive received a mortgage. His family life is even harder to judge. Shakespeare's son Hamlet died in 1596 at 11. The cause is unknown. Hamlet was written several years later, and the names Hamnet and Hamlet were closely related at the time. It is reasonable to wonder whether the loss shaped the play. It is not reasonable to claim we can prove exactly how. The same caution applies to Shakespeare's marriage. He worked away from Anne for long periods, but that was not unusual. His will left her the famous second-best bed, often presented as a final insult. Yet beds were valuable household objects. The best bed could be reserved for guests or inherited by the principal heir, and Anne also had legal rights as his widow. The bequest may have been practical, affectionate, cold, or none of those in the way we imagine. A legal document is a poor marriage counselor. Shakespeare died in Stratford on April 23, 1616, aged 52. His will distributed property and money, mainly to his daughters. It says almost nothing about the plays. That could have been disastrous. 7 years later, his former colleagues John Heminges and Henry Condell published the First Folio, containing 36 plays. 18 had not previously appeared in print. Without that volume, Macbeth, Julius Caesar, Twelfth Night, The Tempest, and many others might have vanished. The folio also helped transform a working playwright into a single great author. Ben Jonson's tribute declared that Shakespeare was not of an age, but for all time. It turned out to be a remarkably successful piece of marketing. Shakespeare's reputation never moved in a straight line. Later theaters rewrote and adapted his plays. 18th century actor David Garrick helped turn him into a national icon. The British Empire carried Shakespeare through schools and institutions around the world, often presenting one English playwright as if he were a compulsory weather system. By the 19th century, admiration had hardened into worship. Shakespeare seemed too knowledgeable, too universal, and too brilliant to be the provincial actor found in the documents. That was when alternative authorship theories gained serious attention. Francis Bacon, Christopher Marlowe, and Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, were among the proposed hidden writers. These theories differ, but many begin with the same assumption. The documented Shakespeare looks too ordinary to have written extraordinary work. Historians generally reject that conclusion. Contemporary writers identified Shakespeare as a poet and playwright. His name appeared on publications. Francis Mears praised him and listed several of his plays in 1598. Hemmings and Condell had worked beside him for years. Ben Jonson knew him personally. Accepting a secret replacement requires turning a large network of colleagues, printers, actors, rivals, patrons, and relatives into participants in a conspiracy that nobody clearly exposed. There is a real authorship discussion, but it is less dramatic. Shakespeare collaborated. Parts of several plays are now attributed to writers such as John Fletcher, Thomas Middleton, and George Wilkins. Early modern theater was collective work. Collaboration does not erase Shakespeare. It places him inside the industry he actually inhabited. The record is also not as empty as people sometimes claim. The Shakespeare Documented Project gathers nearly 500 early references to Shakespeare, his works, and his family. The National Archives holds evidence connecting him to acting companies, royal service, property, finance, and legal cases. New discoveries can still adjust the edges. In 2025, researchers publicized a newly identified family will involving Shakespeare's descendants and New Place. Another recently studied letter may offer fresh evidence concerning Anne Shakespeare, though its interpretation remains debated. But a lost diary is unlikely to emerge and explain Hamlet over breakfast. Shakespeare became mysterious because later generations asked the surviving evidence to do a job it was never designed to do. Parish clerks recorded baptisms. Courts recorded property. Theater companies preserved what they needed for business. Nobody knew that 4 centuries later, millions of people would want to know whether William was happy at home, how he drafted a soliloquy, or what he had for lunch while inventing modern tragedy. The mystery is real, but it is not the mystery of a missing man. It is the mystery of an ordinary, documented life beside an extraordinary body of work. We can see Shakespeare buying houses, signing papers, raising a family, sharing a company, and building a career. Then the records stop at the exact point where curiosity becomes personal. The man did not vanish. He simply left us the plays instead of an explanation.